Professor Karen Wiley-Rappaport, and I have the wonderful pleasure of introducing Jeanine Riedl and her master's capstone in the Psychology with an Emphasis in Media program, an unconventional humor-based approach to fight complacency, motivate the masses. And I just want to say what a pleasure it has been to work with her on this capstone over the last several months and see what I might want to say a pretty brilliant capstone come together that I found to be very interesting and very moving and very enlightening and very important. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the mic, the virtual mic, over to me and let her get started.
Okay, thank you, Karen. That was a lovely introduction. Okay, so on May 25th, 2020, a Black man, George Floyd, found himself outside Cup Foods in the custody of 4 Minneapolis police officers. What I'm about to read is a description of the events that unfolded. A white police officer is kneeling on a Black man's neck. The Black man is lying on the pavement, groaning. He appears to be frothing at the mouth. Other police officers are present and can sometimes be heard and seen. The Black man indicates that he cannot breathe. Various bystanders, male and female, can be heard directing statements to the white officer. His nose is bleeding. He is human. He isn't resisting arrest now. He passed out. Do you think that's cool? Check his pulse. The video pans to a discussion between another officer and a woman who's also filming the incident. She's a firefighter and counsels that they should be checking the Black man's pulse and conducting impressions as he might need them. After Floyd's death, white Americans came out en masse to support racial injustice and put pressure on American companies and institutions to stop systemic racism. White protesters helped to make the Black Lives Matter movement following Floyd's death one of the biggest movements in our nation's history. However, years later, the energy and momentum seem to have waned. The white majority has now become the silent majority. While it may sound funny, this presentation aims to show how an unconventional humor-based approach may be able to get the silent majority back into persistent action. Today, the following topics will be addressed. The timeline. We'll look at how the white majority became the silent majority in the years following George Floyd's death, thereby permitting certain politicians, the white noise, to be heard. Such individuals have used anti-woke rhetoric and introduced laws aimed at disenfranchising marginalized groups from this nation's democratic ideals, liberty, equality, and justice. Complacency. We'll next turn to complacency, and we'll examine how complacency may have affected white Americans' enthusiasm, considering the psychology of motivation, which, as motivation is needed to reverse complacency. We'll next turn to humor. Humor has been studied in many situations and settings with positive results. Specifically in a psychological context, it has shown to garner attention, result in positive effect with an A, and create persistence. Then we'll look at how humor became a viable solution to combating complacency to motivate the masses using a semiotic methodology and psychological framework. Findings and future implications will also be discussed. Because as a country, we must live up to and protect our democratic ideals for everyone, not just some. As discussed on May 25th, 2020, George Floyd, yet another Black individual, died at the hands of police officers. A bystander captures the incident. The video she posts goes viral, and millions come out to protest against racial injustice. What's visibly different this time from other protests is that hundreds of thousands of whites joined the protests. 15 to 26 million Americans protested in counties where the majority were white. 75% of Americans supported the protests across all political orientations. And America's 50 biggest public companies and their foundations in total pledged $50 billion to challenge racism and injustice. In the past 3 to almost 4 years since the passing of Floyd, we've seen changes. This would include the recent decision by the U.S. Supreme Court to reverse affirmative action. However, I do want to recognize that some progress has been made. For instance, the passage of the George Floyd Act, which bans chokeholds and no-knock warrants. Further, in corporate America, many Black people have seen progress in hiring and promotion. Yet, only 5.9% of CEOs are Black. The sentiment tied to this fact was made clear in a recent CNBC and Executive Leadership Council survey that polled Black employees, and almost 70% believe that Black leaders continue to be underrepresented. Black CEO Shendron Thomas, who commented on the survey, said, "The results reflect the sobering reality that translating pronouncements into progress demands a greater and sustained effort in the future." And I'm personally going to emphasize the word sustain, because that's the problem, sustained motivation. And finally, in recent years, we've seen DEI positions slashed at major large corporations, Amazon, Intel, Nike, and Twitter, which is now X. This slide summarizes pretty much the state of this matter. Starting at the upper right, what started as a pressurized mass movement among a large majority of white Americans to work toward racial justice and equality went silent. Now they're the silent majority. This has allowed the voices of some politicians spewing anti-woke or don't say gay rhetoric to become louder, white noise in the background, basically mimicking the constant hum of a vacuum cleaner or electric fan. And ironically, while portraying themselves as protectors of the Constitution, these politicians are not reflecting democratic ideals. Instead, they have put democracy in a very tight vice. So let's address the white elephant in the room, complacency. Complacency is experiencing calm satisfaction with the person's abilities or situation, preventing an individual from trying harder. In essence, it's a lack of motivation. There are multiple motivation-related theories, including social cognitive theory, self-determination theory, and flow theory. All of these suggest that individuals initiate behaviors, i.e. act on their values and beliefs, when they believe they can achieve the goals they have attached to them. This self-belief may be called self-efficacy or competence, depending on the theory, and it's affected by biological, cognitive, social, and emotional aspects. So for instance, if a person feels relaxed, they're more likely to experience a higher degree of self-efficacy regarding a particular task. Also, according to social cognitive theory, this belief doesn't have to be self-initiated. It can be garnered through watching others succeed at a particular task, which is a concept referred to as vicarious experience. Thus, if you see someone who's like you succeed at a task, you believe you can succeed at the task as well. So whether a person perceives her self-efficacy as high or low also will determine whether a behavior is maintained. So for instance, if one perceives her capabilities to be much lower than what a goal task requires, she will experience anxiety, impacting her self-efficacy and competence, and pretty much frustrating the desired outcome. Levels of self-efficacy and competence are also determined by whether the motivation is intrinsic or extrinsic. Intrinsic behavior is pursuing an activity for its own sake. It's internal. In contrast, extrinsic motivation relies on external rewards or pressure, so that once these external pressures are removed, the behavior will likely cease. However, this isn't the case regarding external feedback or directions that aid self-efficacy or competence levels. Lastly, ego depletion theory suggests that self-regulation, which is the ability to control one's behavior to achieve a goal, is a limited resource that can be depleted, sort of like gas running out of a car. This means that someone working hard to accomplish an objective could actually run out of self-regulation or battery life and fail to achieve a set goal. After covering some of these motivational factors, we can now apply them to other psychological research relating to intergroup relations to help explain the behavior, or lack thereof, that ensued in the years following Floyd's death. After Floyd's passing, support magnifies. On May 26th, the day after his death, hundreds of thousands of white Americans came out to support the Black Lives Matter movement. A majority of polled protesters actually said that seeing the videos of police inflicting harm on members of the Black community made them more supportive of the movement. And this actually aligns with research that was conducted by Ulligan Trope. Oligotrope found that whites witnessing instances of racial discrimination actually predicted greater willingness to participate in collective action for racial justice through the pathway of realizing their own racial privilege. Racial privilege, according to them, occurs when the advantaged group becomes not only aware of the discrimination that the minority or disadvantaged group regularly faces, excuse me, but also realizes that this privilege gives them an advantage. For these reasons, it's easy to see how large-scale white support occurred at this particular point in time. It should be acknowledged, too, that the event was amplified via mass media, social and traditional outlets. Media interviews provided clear extrinsic direction on how to get involved in the movement. Plus, viewers saw people succeeding in their protest efforts, giving them efficacy through vicarious experiences. After watching the Floyd video, it's possible many white Americans also experienced either collective guilt or collective shame. And these emotions occur when individuals identify with a group, i.e. white Americans, and perceive not only that their in-group inflicted harm to another group, but also that the harm was either immoral or illegitimate. And while these emotions are related, they're also distinct. Collective guilt focuses on the harm done to the victim, which can motivate action actually until the harm is extinguished. Collective shame, on the other hand, focuses more on righting the in-group's reputation, i.e., I'm not one of those white people. And there are more accessible, less costly ways to correct that wrong. For instance, changing a graphic on social media to actually show that you support Black Lives Matter. Consequently, shame is less likely, though, to encourage long-term corrective action. Moreover, because reputation depends on extrinsic pressures, motivation will likely fade when the reputation is made good again. However, while collective guilt may be good at skirting complacency, it's not entirely out of the complacency woods. For example, individuals likely marched into their places of work on Monday morning, believing they could dismantle systemic racism one employee at a time. However, they came to realize that systematic racism is really deeply embedded in our nation's institutions and organizations. Suddenly, according to the principles of flow theory, the challenge would seem far superior to their skill sets, leaving them likely anxious and stressed and negatively impacting their self-efficacy. Additionally, because systematic racism still exists, it's harder to find role models to emulate, i.e. individuals who have succeeded in eliminating the problem. Another critical point to make is that while the video of George Floyd's death motivated the masses, it's difficult, even traumatic to watch. There must therefore be an alternate means to create momentum and positive effect, that pleasantness that lingers, instead of a negative effect. Humor has been studied in various settings and situations with positive results. Benefits including garnering attention, eliciting amusement, and creating persistence. So we're next going to unpack humor and consider these benefits more closely. Okay. Humor is considered to be a psychological state which is comprised of cognitive, emotive, and behavioral aspects. So the cognitive aspect involves perceiving something as funny. The behavioral aspect encompasses laughing in response to a stimulus, and the emotive aspect results in amusement, which is a positive emotion. The term humor has been used to describe three connected, but they're basically conceptually different constructs, which Warren et al. Refer to as sense of humor, comedy, and humor appreciation. Whereas sense of humor relates to how a person uses and enjoys humor, comedy refers to the stimulus that intends to or succeeds in eliciting a humor appreciation, which is the aforementioned psychological state. So according to Martin et al., 4 distinct humor styles actually exist, and these styles consist of 2 dimensions of humor, one positive and one negative, and each describing how humor is used with respect to oneself as well as to others. So self-enhancing humor is a positive style of humor that's self-directed and used to maintain a positive outlook and perspective on one's life, which makes like daily stresses more tolerable. Affiliative humor is a positive style of humor that is associated with bringing people together. And it involves sharing humor through remarks or jokes And while it's directed toward others, it's never done at another's expense. Self-defeating humor, on the other hand, is a negative style of humor that's self-directed and used to poke fun at oneself in order to garner approval from others. And finally, aggressive humor is a negative style of humor that is directed toward others, but it's actually a humor that's used to offend or debase others in order to promote oneself. Knowing these styles can benefit one's messaging when devising a communications piece, ensuring the information actually resonates with the target audience. However, while useful and informative, these styles don't illuminate what actually differentiates humorous from non-humorous material. So for that, we do have to look at the other two constructs, comedy and humor appreciation. Comedy is considered to be the stimulus that aims to elicit humor appreciation. It can be intentional or unintentional, occupying various forms. So jokes, cartoons, tickles. Warren et al. Set out to actually determine when comedy does and does not result in humor appreciation. To accomplish this task, they identified more than 20 theories that attempted to account for the various ways in which humor was achieved. And they broke these theories down into their respective conditions or antecedents. And they really looked at whether or not the antecedent was present when people experienced the humor appreciation and absent when they didn't experience humor appreciation. And they found that 3 antecedents were always present when humor appreciation occurred, and that those were simultaneity, violation appraisal, and benign appraisal. So simultaneity involves holding 2 perceptions at the same time. Both can be true, but just not at the same time. I would actually think about this like Rubin's optical illusion, where you either see 2 faces or you see a vase if someone points it out to you, but you just can't seem to see both at the same time because they're incongruous. Violation appraisal is described as anything that subjectively threatens a person's well-being, their identity, or their normative belief structure. And benign appraisal is considered to be the subjective perception that something is sensible and does not present a threat. I mean, it's basically harmless. So according to Warren et al., these 3 antecedents working together actually predict humor appreciation. So scholarly literature reviews have consistently shown that humor can grab attention. However, it can also hold attention. And Brigade et al. Established this using eye tracking technology, where respondents either looked at humorous or non-humorous messages within a health-related ad. And the researchers found that the respondents were drawn to the humorous messages and they looked at them longer, so there was longer dwell time, and they returned to them more frequently within the ad. And also humor also elicits amusement, which is a positive emotion that momentarily, according to Barbara Fredrickson's broaden and build theory, broadens one's thought action repertoire and builds resiliency skills, which benefits one's self-efficacy. So according to Fredrickson, both positive and negative emotions are adaptive. They've evolved to benefit human survival, get away from that saber-toothed tiger. However, while negative emotions, for safety and efficiency reasons, narrow one's thinking and behavior, i.e. fight or flight, positive emotions actually broadens one's thinking and behavior, which encourages flexible, innovative, and creative solutions to meet life's ever-changing challenges and opportunities. So we can imagine this positive effect with an A, would benefit those trying to actually combat the complex problem of systemic racism. Moreover, this broadened thinking also builds physical, intellectual, social, and psychological resources, thereby increasing one's coping and resiliency skills. In other words, positive effect fosters self-efficacy. So based on this psychological research and findings, the question became, could humor therefore be used to curtail complacency and substitute for events that, while motivating, like the video of George Floyd, create negative effect? And so this hypothesis would have to be tested. To do this, it was determined that a compare-contrast analysis would be conducted comparing humorous and non-humorous events. To ensure that a fair comparison would be made, They both would have to be in the same media format, so photograph to photograph, video to video, audio to audio, etc. And they both would have to have strong attraction and support. Because the Floyd bystander video received obviously generous attraction and support as witnessed by the audience engagement and participation, it was chosen to represent the non-humorous video. And because attraction and support are easily seen and measured on social media via likes, views, and shares, it was determined that video content from social media platforms would be used to represent the humorous events. Finally, the video would have to be broken down into smaller parts to make their similarities and differences more evident. So Charles Sanders Peirce's 10-class sign system was used. And this semiotic methodology would enable the videos to be deconstructed verbally in a systematic fashion so that a content analysis would then be possible. So 19th century logician, mathematician, philosopher, and pragmatist, I guess jack of all trades, Charles Sanders Peirce posited that everything is a sign that's capable of conveying meaning. Because everything is a sign, Peirce devised a sign system to help decode the meaning of signs, specifically as they progress through our consciousness or understanding. The system has 9 signs, which can be seen in the chart on the right, and each carries a different meaning and is defined. Because these signs travel through our consciousness, they combine in different ways. And they actually create 10 classes of sign, which we see on the left. And this demonstrates how complex the process of meaning making is. Okay, so this slide discusses Peirce's 3 levels of consciousness, which he referred to as firstness, secondness, and thirdness. I've inserted the 10-class sign system into the Peircean style triangle, and the outer triangle and arrows reflect a color spectrum. So we can think of this process of firstness, secondness, and thirdness, again, the levels of consciousness, as moving through the spectrum of colors or definitions of each class, moving from the yellow of firstness toward the red of secondness, and eventually landing on the blue at thirdness. Seeing how the colors slowly change reminds us that this is a very ordered process. Firstness is an unconscious quality, an almost meditative state. Imagine that you're looking at a flame, for instance, but you're focusing so hard that you lose track of the flame, but you see the essence of it, the orangish, yellowish glow. At the time, so absorbed, you realize that this orange could be anything. This orange glow could be anything. It has a sense of something, but you aren't aware exactly of what it is. There's just the potential of its existence. However, when the flame finds itself in the wick of a candle, which doesn't take long, you arrive at the conscious level of secondness. Thus, firstness is a brief, fleeting, and transitory state. And once it embeds itself into an object, person, place, or thing, secondness is achieved. So secondness is a conscious state. It's an associated state. For instance, there is now a relationship between the yellowness of the flame and the wick of a candle. It's marked by a reaction, realizing the relationship between the sense and quality of firstness and the object it finds itself. At this point, our brains want to make meaning of the relationship, so we're propelled to thirdness. Heading to thirdness, we aim to make meaning of the relationship witnessed at secondness. To do so, we actually apply experiences, memories, habits, and learnings informed by the culture and society in which we live. So for instance, a lit candle could mean peace, a vigil, or a romantic dinner. The possibilities of meaning making really are endless, according to Peirce. It's a process of inquiry, and it's very much determined by our cultural and societal settings. This system and process were used to just deconstruct the different video frames. I took the definitions, the signs in each of these classes and applied them to the video content. So this is an overview of the analysis that was conducted. Step 1, the humorous posts were collected on various social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok, from October 26th to November 3rd. However, to cast a wider net, posts from January 1st through November 3rd, 2023 were considered. These posts had to have over 250,000 likes and or 1 million views if they were pulled from TikTok, because that's an important TikTok metric. Additionally, they had to have at least one of the following: hashtag LOL, hashtag LMAO, or a laughing emoji in the post or in the comments, of which there had to be at least 10. At the end of the collection period, 37 posts were given a title. They were written on a piece of paper, they were placed in a jar and shaken. From there, 2 humorous posts were randomly selected from the jar for comparison against the Floyd video. So step 2, the videos were watched and their contents were recorded and put into a table. And at step 3, the video content was then applied to the definition of signs of Peirce's 10-class sign system, moving through the process of firstness, secondness, and thirdness. And then step 4 were 10 statements, therefore, resulted and used in a compare contrast analysis. So this slide captures the findings, and for the sake of time, I'm going to only discuss one of the humorous videos, which was Nutella Spells Peanut Butter. The description of the video actually appears here in the table, but I'm going to invite you to watch and just hold my breath and hope that when I click on it, it goes.
Mutella.
What's the word?
So hopefully you did laugh at that. And ironically, a jar of peanut butter is actually situated behind the Nutella jar. Below the image, we can observe how this content was deconstructed through the definitions in the 10-class sign system, which resulted, again, as I mentioned, in 10 statements. So at firstness, as discussed, we only have a sense of something. Anything is possible. Thus, we see at point 1, we have a sense of expectedness or informativeness or even happiness or sadness because we don't know what's going to happen. However, at secondness, we're suddenly forced to react in laughter as the child does not say what he's felt. Our brains seek further meaning and we move to thirdness. As we progress, though, we apply what we know about our world in which we live, and at thirdness conclude that learning a language can occur through visual associations, but successful communication only occurs when the word spells out what it is. So since more interpretation is possible, I want to say at this point, it's also likely that other questions can come up. For instance, the observer may recall reports that academic learning suffered due to the pandemic. So does this demonstrate that? So questions can therefore linger. Moving on to the Floyd video, I actually read its contents at the beginning. So we're going to move our attention toward the Persian triangle below it. At firstness, we again have only the sense of something, a sense that's brief and fleeting, as we notice that a white police officer is kneeling on the body of a Black man, which quickly moves us to secondness. At secondness, we experience a force reaction as we hear bystanders pleading with the officer to remove himself from the Black man. A forced response of upset, shock, worry, or concern occurs as we see that the man is distressed, gasping for breath. Our minds, therefore, require meaning so that we move on to thirdness. At thirdness, we again apply what we know about the world to the situation and conclude that, at least in America, police officers who are not being harmed should neither be harming nor ignoring the harm they could be inflicting on a citizen. So after completing this process with another humorous clip, the similarities and differences were made apparent. So looking at the similarities, we notice that obviously both videos garnered great attention and support because that was part of the research criteria. But second, we see that research has also shown that humorous but also non-humorous events attract and hold attention, because negative events attract and hold attention as an adapted survival response. All of the videos also included a violation. A Western cultural societal norm was violated. Recalling Warren et al., 3 antecedents are needed for humor amusement, and that's simultaneity, a violation appraisal, and a benign appraisal. And then considering the differences in Nutella, there is no direct immediate threat present. However, with the Floyd video, that was not the case. A public servant was actually harming a fellow American, and we perceive that as American citizens, our democratic ideals are also being threatened. The situation actually creates an implied and adaptive call to action in the Floyd video, I would argue. Recalling concepts from the broaden and build theory, we experience a negative situation that narrows our thinking and reactions. We fight. With the humor, however, the benign appraisal does not lead to that response. Thus, the lack of call to action becomes the glaring difference when comparing the two videos. Research, however, has shown that this can actually be easily fixed. So Bodenbecker conducted a study where participants viewed two versions of a segment from the humorous show Late Night with John Oliver. He was discussing net neutrality, which is the idea that internet service providers treat all online content equally instead of slowing some content down or making it unavailable, which greatly affects our freedom to receive information. So one segment of the show included a call to action directing individuals to write something on the Federal Commission's communications website, whereas the other segment did not. And Bodenbecker found that participants indicated an intent to act when a call to action was incorporated, whereas they did not when the call to action was absent. Thus, by incorporating a call to action with clear direction, humorous content could have the potential, given all other elements being the same, to have the same effect as the Floyd video and motivate people to do something without experiencing all of the negative effects. Moreover, we've seen that our resources would not get depleted and our self-efficacy would be enhanced. So humor is therefore a potential solution for communication strategies that promote our democratic values and require long-term and persistent action, especially when protecting marginalized groups' rights. So before concluding, I'd like to offer some suggestions on integrating humor into communication strategy. So we need to remember that there are 4 distinct humor styles. There's self-enhancing, there's affiliative, there's self-defeating, and there's aggressive. Knowing which style your target audience uses and enjoys will help to ensure the humorous message resonates as such. Ensure that all 3 antecedents, simultaneity, violation appraisal, and benign appraisal, are accounted for so that humor appreciation can be achieved. And then relying upon Charles Sanders Peirce's semiotic sign system and its levels of consciousness allows communication, ideas, concept, and messages to be deconstructed, lending insight into the kinds of thoughts, reactions, and questions a piece of proposed content may raise. However, if his class sign system, if this particular class sign system was intimidating, there is a shortcut. You just need to remember that firstness is comparable to a quality or a sense of something that hasn't yet embedded itself into an object, person, place, or thing. Secondness is a force that causes an immediate reaction to the realized association. And thirdness is applying that association to what the individual might remember based on their memory, their experiences, learning, and habits, which are all informed by cultural and societal norms. And lastly, since this presentation only investigated video content, it cannot speak to how written text or still images would compare. So future research and testing, perhaps using a focus group, is recommended. So in conclusion, humorous content not only garners and holds attention, but also leads to positive effect that opens up thinking for better problem solving. It also improves self-efficacy and maintains persistence. With the mere addition of a call to action, it's hoped that the semiotic methodology and psychological framework proposed here will assist those who are charged or who are interested in moving the proverbial needle forward, helping them to turn down the white noise by creating humor-based communication strategies and outreach that can build and maintain momentum so that democratic ideals can be preserved and promises made can be promises kept. So all hearts, hands, and heads in, and in the words of one of my favorite Chicago authors, burst the spirit sleep, wake up America, stump the experts. And that's from Saul Bellow Henderson, The Rain King, 1959. Thank you. The rest is references. A lot of reference.